I'm going to continue with Oneness versus the 1% by Vandana Shiva and Kartikey Shiva. The gate story of the 1% is not a universal story. There is no word on ecology or ecosystems in Bill Gates' universe story. There is only a project for mastery and control through genetic engineering based on reductionism, geoengineering and the engineering of history. Eco-apartheid, the illusion of our separation from nature, is the old story of the mechanistic age. Big history continues this violent separation. We need the birth of Ecocene, or what F. Thomas Berry calls the ecozonic age, where we recognise that we are Earth citizens, members of the Earth community. This is the new story that our resurgent humanity is writing by breaking free of fossil fuels, GMOs and the cages and prisons of mechanistic reductionism, breaking free of the mechanical mind, the money machine and the pseudo-democracy run by the money machine, which is robbing us of our histories and our freedom, our self-organisation and our future. Our futures and freedom depend on our diverse stories. The colonisation by the 1% depends on erasing our stories, our collective memory, our imagination from which arise our actions and struggles. People across the world are writing a new story, recognising the brutality of colonisation, old and new, exploring new ways of joining the local with the planetary, linking the many creation stories of our diverse cultures and joining our creativity and intelligence with the creativity and intelligence of every living being. It is the emerging story of one humanity on one planet, refusing to be colonised, resolute in the defence of our diverse interconnected freedoms. How the 1% subverts democracy. Humanity stands at an evolutionary crossroads which can either choose to continue to walk towards our extinction on the path shaped by the 1% over the last 500 years, or we can choose to sow the seeds of the future as members of the Earth community with a consciousness and conviction that extinction is not inevitable, that we have the potential to walk another path shaped by our commitment to peaceful co-evolution with other species and cultures. We will either make peace with the Earth and secure our future survival by realising we are on Earth and a part of it, or we will face extinction as humans. Even as we push millions of other species to extinction, we will either make peace with our diversity or destroy the social fabric woven by diversity, and with it destroy the social conditions for our continued existence. We can consciously choose the path of oneness, living and celebrating our many diversities, interconnectedness through bonds of compassion, interdependence and solidarity, or we can for a one short time live enslaved by the 1%, internalising the powerlessness and marginalisation they engineered, afraid to change, clinging to illusions of security, while our real ecological security is undermined and our real social security embodied in real relationships is ruptured and broken through the politics of division, hate and fear. The choice is between freedom through oneness versus slavery to the 1%, between staying alive versus extinction. The resurgence of the real has become a precondition for the continued survival and evolution of our species. Living through illusions is no longer a luxury we can afford. We must become aware, and rejuvenating the planet and reclaiming humanity are not two different ends reached through different paths between the earth and society, are interwoven in one individual, vibrant, colourful fabric of life. Breaking free of the 1% and their constructs is not just possible, it has become necessary. It is an ecological necessity because the worldview of separation combined with an illusion of limitless extraction and exploitation of nature is pushing us to an ecological precipice. It is an economic necessity because a 1% world will render the 99% disposable, extinguishing our diverse creativities, potential and possibilities. It is a democratic necessity because the rule of the 1% is a violent dictatorship. It destroys our fundamental freedom and the freedom for all beings to evolve in an interrelated world, in an earth family. It is a social necessity because the world of the 1% destroys our social being, our communities and our commons through privatization and enclosure, by reducing us to becoming consumers, and by dividing us on the basis of gender, race and religion. It is a human necessity because participating in a world of limitless greed, profit, violence and power robs us of our humanity. Both the 1% ruler and the 99% disposable people lose their humanity. Greed, fear and hate go hand in hand, helping each other to grow. Over the past 4.5 decades of work to conserve the Earth's resources on an intellectual journey to transcend the mechanical mind, and by engagement with creating living economies based on non-violence and real creativity, genuine democracies based on real freedom, and living cultural based on love and compassion, I have always turned to India's struggle for freedom from the British Empire. I have also turned to Gandhi's teachings for inspiration to act in times of hopelessness, to open spaces when all spaces are shrinking, to cultivate compassion and solidarity in times of greed, fear and hate, to reclaim our power when we are being told power is the monopoly of those who derive fake money from money and money alone. While the times have changed, the patterns of colonisation stay the same, based on violence and destruction of people's freedoms, economies, taking what is not yours, collecting unjust rents, creating constructs to divide and rule, and of supremacy. The patterns of liberation and freedom are also perennial, and these contours of freedom shape the road to the resurgence of the real. The chains of unfreedom are globally integrated today. They control every dimension of our lives through a consolidated system designed by the mechanical mind and the money machine. The control is exerted through the construction of illusion, through convergence and concentration, through imposing the law that allows the free operation of money machine, through banning people's alternatives and are based on real freedom. 3 Gandhian principles that the Maharata distilled from the struggles and practice of freedom throughout history have been my inspiration. Swaji, self-organisation, self-rule, freedom as autopoiesis, Swadeshi, self-reliance and creating local economies, and Satyagraha, the force of truth, of creative civil disobedience. Swaja, the resurgence of real freedom for all beings. Because we are not isolated, atomized particles, but interconnected beings, freedom is also automistic. It is relational and it is interconnected. Human freedom is indivisible from the freedom of the earth and the rights of all her beings. Humans are less free when they destroy nature and nature's rights. Human freedom is a continuum, including the freedom of all colours, faiths, genders and cultures. Freedom is self-organisation, autopoiesis. The lack of freedom is manifest in our externally imposed uniformity, holoposis. Swaja, self-rule, self-govern, is the basis of real freedom in nature and society, beginning at the smallest level and emergence at higher levels, because it allows the thriving of biological and cultural diversity, Swaji defined India's freedom movement, encompassing not just a political freedom, but economic freedom as well. Gandhi's Hind Swaraj has been for me the best teaching on real freedom. In the context of industrialization and the empire, it has become even more relevant in the search for freedom in times of corporate rule. Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj in 1909, more than 100 years ago. On his way from England to South Africa, it has been published in the column of Indian Opinion in South Africa in the 1921 edition. He wrote the following as a word of explanation. In my opinion, it is a book which can be put into the hands of a child. It teaches the gospel of love in place of that of hate. It replaces violence with self-sacrifice. It puts soul force against brute force. For Gandhi, true civilization is that mode of conduct which directs humans on to the path of right livelihood, and based on his concept of right livelihood, he defined freedom. It is Swaji when we learn to rule ourselves. This is autopoiesis in political context. According to him, a society based on Swaji is a true democracy, since it is based on the realization that people are in charge of their destinies. It is based on Lok Shakti, on people's power. Swaji involves not just the periodic accountability of governments through elections, which in any case have been hijacked by big money. It implies freedom from domination, coercion and institutionalized violence, which is structural to central governance. He believes that democracy must in essence mean the art and science of mobilizing the entire physical, economic and spiritual resources of all the various sections of the people in the service of the common good of all. Gandhi was deeply uneasy with the modern states as it was abstracted from society, centralized, bureaucratic, obsessed with homogeneity and suffused with the spirit of violence. He believed that since all the prevailing forms of governments took the modern state for granted and represented different ways of organizing it, they were inherently incapable of tackling its structural defects. The philosophy and participatory direct democracy and democratic pluralism recognises that diverse communities have diverse interests. That is the shaping of national law and policy, that they have legitimate democratic rights of decision making and self-determination through self-rule. It acknowledges that representative democracy is inadequate for protecting the people's interest in an era of globalization. Under corporate influence, governments increasingly act on behalf of corporations. Political power today reflects the top 1% of the economic pyramid, crushing the 99%, and with them the earth and her species. The state is mutating into a corporate entity working for corporate welfare, leaving people and the planet to suffer the consequences of economic collapse, ecosystem collapse, the climate change. Our challenge is to look for ways to shift the dominant political system away from exploitative and non-substantial economic model. The demand for their democratic rights has been expressed by a tribal and indigenous people as the self-determined rights to agricultural biodiversity through their rights to plant genetic resources, and the self-determined right to practice sustainable agriculture in systems that are uncharacterized by the patriarchal domination of women, urban domination over rural areas, and colonizers dominating our indigenous people. Democratic pluralism necessarily requires an inclusion of communities that have hitherto been excluded. This world certainty transforms both the communities characterized by internal inequalities as well as the government structures within countries. The philosophy of democratic pluralism also recognises the anti-democratic nature of the centralised nation state on which state protectionism of the past was founded. At the same time, it sees the emergence of corporate protectionism and of corporate surveillance state as real threat to democratic rights and economic livelihoods in every country. In this perspective, countering such radicalisation requires the reinvention of national sovereignty by democratic processes to create national systems which act in partnership with local communities to protect the natural wealth and the intellectual heritage of the country and self-organisation by people. People's movements are demanding that power must not be concentrated in institutions of centralised nation states. It must be distributed equally throughout society and be dispersed through a multiplicity of institutions with more power at the local level, controlled by local communities and their institutions, whereas conventional power moves from centralised control of nation states to the even more centralised control of global corporations and global institutions like the World Trade Organization, WTO, World Bank and the IMF. People's democratically driven agendas push for greater localisation, both political and economic. Political localisation means more decisions are transferred to the local space. Political decentralisation and localisation and Gandhi's Swarajya implies circular democracies and the circulation of power through society. Participation is central to this new democracy as inclusive democracy for all people, irrespective of class, gender, religion and race. It goes beyond representation and is based on daily participation, not simply on a vote once every 4 or 5 years. It is based on caring for the land and nature, on participation in the cultivation of communities that act with strength and solidarity to protect the earth and society when the erosion of democracy is all around us. The old democracy, based on electoral representation, is a linear extraction of power from the people. It is increasingly leaving people powerless to protect their land and their lives and their livelihoods and their freedom in the face of land grab, the destruction of the livelihood and the destruction of our life support system and democratic rights. We need to sow the seeds of real freedom in our imaginations and in our daily lives through our everyday actions and in our diverse and multiple relationships. The seeds of freedom are in our minds and in our hands. Swarajya as self-organised freedom begins deep within each of us, allowing for the possibility of cooperation and the cultivation of self-governing communities. It enables a transition from scarcity, competition and fear to the co-creation of abundance through sharing. The resurgence of the real begins with breaking free of the invisible prison institutionalised by the 1% and becoming aware of our interconnectedness with other beings and other human beings, as well as our own potential to create and produce in a partnership with nature and our communities. Produce in a partnership with nature and our communities. The first prison is the mechanical mind, which fragments our world view, denies our intelligence and creativity, shrinks our potential and our being, and cripples nature and us, reducing both a raw material for the money machine, changing how we think. How the world is the most important step towards transforming our lives and transforming the world of which we are part. The resurgence of the real begins with knowing reality through living reality and living intelligence. The diversity of species calls on us to protect the ecological space and freedom of all species. The wild is the capacity for self-organisation of all life The diverse species of the earth and the earth herself is a living organism. This is our consciousness that must shape cultural and communities, economies and democracies, sciences and technologies. In the contemporary order, still dominated by the 1%, the Earth's community has been reduced to the human community. Humans as the Earth's citizens with duties and rights have been replaced by corporations with no duties to either the Earth or society, only unlimited rights to exploit both. Corporations have been assigned legal personhood, and corporate rights are now extinguishing the rights of the earth and the rights of the people to Earth's resources. The major democratic issue emerging in India and throughout the world in the context of the destruction unleashed by the money machine are the rights of the earth and the democratic human rights of all people, especially the most marginalised and the most vulnerable. And across the world's communities are organising to defend the rights of the earth. We can no longer afford to create separation and walls between knowledge system, economic systems and political systems. We can no longer think and act in silos. We need to connect the economy and democracy and economic democracy to Earth's democracy, seeing interconnectedness and making connectedness as our opening for creating a new world based on freedom for all life to flourish in wellness. Swaji is our times, in our times is Earth democracy. Thinking and acting as one humanity is now an economic and political imperative. So I'll leave it there for now.